Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, our dear teachers, and welcome to our first podcast. My name is Catherine Ossoy, and I'm going to host our meeting today. So, how are you? Feel free to share anything about your day, how it is going, and I hope everything is okay and you're ready to be involved in a very interesting conversation with our speakers. By the way, today our speakers are Marina Evstratova, the head of methodology in Teachers Training Center. Good afternoon. And Gary Smith, a workshop expert in TTC. Glad to see you. How are you today?
In my particular case, I'm doing quite well. It is apparently the rainy season here, so I can't be better. But Marina, what about you?
Everything is wonderful so far. It's quite warm outside. It's +2, I think. So yeah,
Oh, quite warm. Yeah.
or
Is it
winter is
snowing?
coming.
Our definitions of warm are very different.
Gary, what about the weather in your city? It is raining, but what about the
It's
temperature?
raining. Oh, in this case, I think it might be boiling at least because it's about 19 degrees here. So
Whoa.
yeah, yeah. That was saying
Definitely.
bit of a difference.
Many minds. Yeah, in my city now it is just +4, but it's quite warm. Yeah, I would agree with Marina. Nice weather. Why not? Yeah. Okay, so as I've already said, we are here to talk about very serious issue, and it's not about the weather conditions. Yeah, so our topic is about teaching low-level adult learners if you don't share any language, especially. So, and let's ask our audience first. Have you ever had any of such experience? What is the most challenging thing about it? We will be really glad if you can share some information about that and tell us how it was. And while our listeners are answering, let me rephrase this question and address it to our experts. Is the fact that there is no common language the biggest problem in teaching beginner or elementary students? What do you think about that, Marina?
Well, at some point in my life, I would definitely say yes. It is the biggest problem because how can I explain anything to my student if they don't understand me? But uh, my opinion about that completely changed during my CELTA course several years ago. And well, basically what exactly changed my experience was the first session with our teacher, like the first day, the first hour of our group standing in front of the teacher. And he did an experiment with us showing how to teach completely without any L1. So he pretended to be a Croatian teacher, and well, nobody of our group spoke any Croatian. He was, to be honest, A1, so he knew only a couple of phrases just because he, I don't know, he lived in Croatia and picked up some language. And well, basically, what he demonstrated opened up my eyes on this issue. So even if you do not know how to explain anything in the language, and your students do not understand you, there are some tools that you can use potentially to fill this gap of information between you and your students and deliver the knowledge of the language. Gestures, miming, different objects, the textual input, anything like that could help. And it's not the biggest issue at all. If we're talking about adult students, I guess that more psychological factors or sociological factors would play a greater role. Adult students are mature individuals, and we're teaching them something, well, that is too basic from their point of view. They might get demotivated because of some minor mistakes, and well, basically that's the main point, and that I would say is the main difficulty.
Mhm. Okay, so as I see, there are really lots of different issues, right? So that's why, what is it that teachers can do with such students? What can you say us? Marina, can you start?
A lot of stuff. Well, in terms of issues, I would also add that, well, and I'm sure that Gary also might have this experience since Gary is teaching speaking clubs. For example, when students do not understand the simplest tasks that they're supposed to do, uh, and it might seem to you that, well, you're saying something obvious element like read and answer the questions, or I don't
Mhm.
know, if we're talking about the Winbox classroom, for instance, read and match the definitions, and students don't know what this match is, or fill in the
Yeah.
gaps or something like that, some elementary tasks. And in this case, a lot of stuff could help. If we're talking about instructions, there are lots and lots of ways to help your students non-verbally. And I like this principle that was coined well, many years ago actually. And this principle is called ensuring message abundance or abundancy. There are different ways of well,
Mhm.
naming that actually. And this principle is about using different communication channels when you are delivering the instruction. So you are using the verbal channel, and then you're supporting this verbal instruction with your gestures, with miming, with different objects. You're showing how to do it. You're demonstrating how to do this task. For example, you're doing the first example with your student, and then students are guessing what they're supposed to do while being in this, well, context that is filled
Mhm.
with different clues that they can rely on. So that's one of the principles.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you so much, Gary. What can you say?
Well, there is something else that I want to point out here as well. And I have had the same experiences as Marina here, at least. But I've also found, especially recently, that if you provide the student with some thinking time, often they perform a lot better. And it actually happened in the last week or so where I had a student and I decided to, practice something that I've seen and read a bit about. There was this paper by, what's her name? Mary Rowe or something similar to that in 1972. And she and someone else actually did a whole task, a whole assignment, a whole paper essentially on trying to find out what different things might influence the lower levels essentially, and one of which was the time that the students had to answer. Generally teachers only have about like 1 second that they give a student, and 1 second is too short, especially if you don't know the language, for your brain to pass everything that it needs to. And if you give them a bit more time, then the brain has time to catch up, to think about what they know about what you said, for example, how they can answer it. And then generally, the more time you give them, the better they perform. So if you give them adequate time, at least, you can also improve that teaching, scenario, at least.
Mhm. Okay, actually, yeah, because I suppose not all of teachers can give time to think to their students. Yeah, if they're thinking like teachers can say, oh, maybe they have problems. Yeah, I should help them. So,
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, sometimes teachers are too quick to jump in and help, and often that's good, but can also be detrimental in certain situations.
okay, so just take their time. Yeah, just
Yes,
don't
yeah, yeah,
help them. Definitely, yeah, at that moment
yeah, yeah.
immediately.
Generally,
Okay.
they found that between 5 and 10 seconds, 10 seconds might seem long, but 5 to 10 seconds is generally the sweet spot for most students.
Mhm.
So, yes.
Okay, yeah, very useful. Okay, thank you, Gary. So, and I've heard a lot about modeling all the answers. What about this idea? Is it useful, Marina? What do you think?
Well, I would say that modeling is the basic teaching principle if we're talking about ELT classes in general, and specifically if we're talking about lower levels, because lower levels do not know anything in the language yet, and they might get too anxious about experimenting the language just because they don't have the luggage to experiment with, the language luggage in their head. And well, in this case, what works all the time with beginner students specifically is when you give the sentence stem, for example, of the simplest phrase that the students are supposed to fill in. And when you support your student in this way, when you scaffold all the answers that they're supposed to give you with sentence stems or with some chunks, with some phrases that there's ready-made phrases that they don't have to think about, it helps immensely. And well, in this case, we're talking about linguistic modeling. We can also say that task modeling helps, and I think I've mentioned that. So if you show your student how to do the exercise. If you do the first example together, if you answer the question first, and then give your student the chance to answer the question as well, that's also going to help and show them what you expect from them. And I would also say that, well, there is such a term as metacognitive modeling, which is about showing how to learn. And lots of beginner students, elementary students, those especially adults, if they don't have any knowledge of the language, they do not have the study skills. This fact that they are adults and they do not speak the language shows that they probably have never had any experience studying it, and they don't know how to react to mistakes, how to, I don't know, how to learn the words, how to learn grammar, how to react to some, I don't know, pitfalls or something like that. And if you explain, if you have the chance, right, if you share L1, you can explain it in L1. Or if you just react positively and support them while they're making mistakes, it's going again to help immensely. It's going to eliminate this, well, anxiety that takes place in a lesson, actually. And that also is going to help them learn a little bit better, at least.
Okay. Actually, one more thing, Marina, which you have just mentioned, is about grammar. You know, all of students, not all of them, but most of them, they expect that we are going to teach them grammar. What about that? Like, how to teach grammar?
Oh,
Do we need it?
well, I'll pop in here just a tiny bit. So the whole thing is, especially with the lower level students here, you should preferably not focus on grammar entirely. And this actually ties into what Marina said about the metacognitive skills here. Especially when you are a lower level, it is often a lot better to teach them functional language as opposed to actual grammatical structures. Because, well, I have, for example, a friend who had never learned a second language at all. And when she was in university, she was actually, she was fortunate enough to have a wonderful professor that taught her how to learn, different languages. And currently, she's on her fourth language or so. And the way that she always starts is she tries to get some functional language that she can use in everyday situations and understand those, when to use it, for example, what it means, and then she gradually starts applying this into, well, everyday life, for example. And only after she's gotten enough functional language to at least do basic tasks, for example, they go into the actual grammar of why we need to do this, for example, etc., etc., etc. Because that way the students stay motivated, essentially, and they continue want to use the language in different situations, see where they can use the language, and it just spurs on that learning material. So I'd say functional language first always, and then you go over to grammar as a secondary side note after the functional language, just so that there's more interaction and more speaking available.
Okay. Anyway, lots of students like, okay, yeah, like we teach them different chunks. Yeah, we try to avoid some grammar points, but they do some mistakes. They make some mistakes. So what to do in this case? How should we react on that?
Okay, now that is another wonderful, wonderful, well, question essentially.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this ties into the whole motivation situation as well. And if you continually overcorrect a student, what's going to happen? Where they originally had this high motivation, they'll eventually just, and the motivation will disappear entirely, and they'll think, okay, all my experiments have failed, or everything that I've tried to do with a language has failed, and the teacher's overcritical, overly critical. There's nothing I can do about the situation. Maybe I'm just not cut out to learn, any languages, so I'll just stick with what I already know. And that is something that we don't want. So we should preferably try and keep our corrections and whatnot with only to that which they've just done, in the lesson or so, or what they've already learned. And we shouldn't overcorrect. So maybe one out of every five or 10 mistakes that we see that are important in their particular situation. That's where, well, I'd say is the sweet spot, at least. What's going on with me? So, yeah.
Okay, so I hope that all of this information is really useful. Yeah, and I see that some teachers they can't wait to use it. It's good. By the way, our dear listeners, feel free to share some of your experience if you ever teached adults without sharing L1. Yeah, it can be really interesting to know that. So, and let's go on. And Marina, I have one question about the language which teachers use. You know, there is the information that we shouldn't grade the language and we should show our students everything what we know. Is it gonna work like that? What do you
No.
think?
Well, maybe in some
Unfortunately.
particular situations it's going to work, but your students have to be really, motivated to listen to you and to try to understand what you're saying, to note every word that they don't know, and then to check everything right after the lesson. That's not going to work massively with all of the students. And well, I can understand where this belief, I would say, comes from. Some teachers think that, and well, it's partially true, that the language that we're using in a lesson can be considered a language input. So the something that our students can potentially use, they can process it, and then they can extract some of the phrases, words, I don't know, features of pronunciation out of it. And partially that's true, but for it to happen, for the processing to happen, all the input has to be understandable or comprehensible, as we sometimes call it. And in this case, if we're talking about lower level students, we have to grade our language down as much as possible. And I mean, of course, it's going to be barely possible with the zero level students, but here we're getting back to the thing that we've mentioned about gestures, about showing pictures. And for example, if you're teaching in Wimbox, you can use the dictionary, you can use the pointer, you can use the notes, you can use a bunch of stuff, and basically that's going to support you here. If you don't have any interactive classroom or board, that's going to be a lot more difficult, but still, it's not impossible. And I mentioned basically the experiment that our CELTA teacher performed. And well, in this case, you can actually, our listeners can perform an experiment with your own language. So you can open any material on the platform for beginners, for lower level students, or for the lowest level that you're teaching, at least. Open any slide, any exercise, and think about the typical instructions that you will give to your student, for example, this level that you're teaching. Note this down, then you can open either the GSE Toolkit or EVP Online, English Vocabulary Profile Online, and then find all the words and phrases that correspond to the lowest level. For example, if you're using GSE, Kate will send you the link here in the chat. So if you're using the GSE toolkit, you can set the limit from 10 to, well, roughly 14. That would correspond to a complete beginner. And if you're using the EVP Online, you can just set A1. There is a scale in letters and numbers from A1 and higher. And then you can find, you could see all the words that correspond to this level, and you could compare your instruction to this list, and you would see that lots and lots of phrases. For example, let's jot something down, let's listen attentively, or you don't need to understand every word, ignore unknown words. Ignore unknown words. All of these phrases are not going to be found in this list. So you would need to coin your instructions down to the simplest phrases possible. Your instructions have to be short, like, I don't know, 5-7 words maximum in length. And in this way, it's almost a guarantee that you're not going to use any unnecessary fillers, anything that your student will not understand. And one more point is that, well, the phrases that you use, at least in the beginning, have to be similar. And do not use different instructions to the same tasks that you're given. For example, if you read a text and then answer the questions, use the same instruction for this kind of tasks, for instance. In this way, the student will hear this instruction every single lesson, and they would memorize it faster than in comparison with the situation when you're using different instructions all the time. So yeah, that's an interesting experiment that you can perform. Yep.
Actually, yeah, lots of information, I would say. And actually, this topic about grading your language sounds really interesting. Gary, can you elaborate on that? What can you say about this?
Okay, okay. So, at least on grading your own language here, there are, well, two main things that we take into consideration when we're talking about language complexity, at least here. And Marina gave some amazing, what was I? Marina gave some amazing tools that you can use in order to see your own language complexity. But you also need to take into consideration your students' complexity as well. And the two main parts that we have is linguistic complexity and then, conceptual complexity. They're pretty much exactly what you think they might be. So, linguistic complexity is essentially when speech contains a lot of elaborate words and, constructs, maybe even some phrases and idioms, all these wonderful things. Then you have conceptual complexity, which deals more with the ideas that the sentences and speech contains. So you need to make sure that not only is your conceptual and linguistic complexity at the level of students, you need to make sure that when you grade them as well, you take this into consideration. Otherwise, they might also get to the point where they are, you know, there might be psychological trouble there, like they are demotivated because they already know how to say this in, say, Russian or Croatian or whatever the language they have, but then getting to that exact same point in English, for example, might cause some troubles as well. So yeah,
So, yeah, we should be really careful, yeah, how to
pretty
use
much, pretty much.
instructions. So I hope that these tools, which we have just shared with you, and all of these pieces of advice will be really useful. And as we can see, like there is more to the issue than just language itself. Marina, is there anything else that is critical to the learning process?
Well, apart from the language and something that we can call the psychological points, right? Motivation, anxiety, and all of that stuff, I would say that study skills are very, very important here. And I guess that at some point it might even be impossible to teach a student who doesn't have any study skills. And by study skills, I mean knowing how to learn words, knowing how to use the dictionary, knowing how much homework is enough not to be too demanding of yourself. Knowing that, I don't know, a lesson has to have a structure. And for example, some students are really talkative, and it's wonderful that they're talkative. But if they're not giving their teacher a room to teach them, actually, it's not going to work in the long term perspective. And well, in terms of study skills, there is also a point worth mentioning as intolerance of ambiguity. That's a special term that means the tendency to interpret every pitfall, every ambiguous situation when you don't know what to do as a threat. And I see this a lot happening with Russian students, with Russian speaking students. I do not know how widespread it might be in different cultures, but with Russian speaking students, that's a huge problem. When students don't know what to do or they don't know the word, they cannot understand the sentence, they start translating everything, or they start being nervous and asking like, what a stupid text we're reading, or what a stupid task we're doing. I do not know what it's for. And all of those emotions arise and it becomes impossible to teach them. And these situations show that our students are, well, some point intolerant of this ambiguity, and this um, problem might be solved by teaching them some study skills, by showing how to learn the words, how to react to some situations, for example, when you don't know something, when you teach them strategies, how to deal with texts that contain a lot of unknown information. All of that is going to potentially help. It's not going to happen right now. You're teaching them all the strategies in one lesson and everything becomes just perfect. Right after that, no, you would need at least several lessons to show them how it works, to gradually teach them use these strategies, and then potentially it's going to become better. So it takes time to teach them study skills, but this is something that we must do.
Yeah,
Otherwise, yeah, it's going to become problematic.
definitely. So, Marina, thank you for your answer. And now I have one more question for you, not as experts. Yeah, I want to ask you as teachers. Have you ever had any situations when you needed to teach adults without sharing the same language? How was your experience? Gary, what can you say about that? I see you're smiling. It means that you have some
Uh,
experience, right?
yeah, so this is way back to when I first started teaching when I was abroad, essentially. And one of the first classes that I'd ever taught was a low level adults class. And I'd been prepared for this like since studies essentially, but nothing really makes you prepared for that
Mhm.
eventual situation. And honestly, what I know now is through experience and reading and, making sure that I have the necessary experience. But basically, the only way that I got through to them was by practicing one of two things. One was the phrases, the functional language, and then the message abundance and sticking to exactly what I needed to say. Because I remember the first, well, 30, 45 minutes was not really too problematic, but it's definitely something memorable. I remember seeing the vacant eyes eventually of all the student there, and after the second and third one, once I gotten used to it and whatnot, it was a lot better. But I remember my first time ever teaching, low level adults, and it's something that I still wish I could have done better at least. So yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I think we always can find something what we can make better. Yeah. And this is the
pretty
thing.
much.
Marina, what about you? What about your experience?
Well, I just remembered the first time I actually taught a group, and this group was a group of German. Well, it was a mixed group, but the majority of students were German. There were several girls from Israel, as far as I remember, and there was one Russian girl. And this was my Celtic course. And this was the group with beginners. Well, not complete beginners. They could use some language already, but now when I think about my experience, I vividly realize that sharing the first language with one of the students was actually a blocker, a huge blocker, because with all of the students I could maintain some contact, and well, what helped them and helped me, as far as I can understand that, is using those strategies. Well, all of us knew that we do not share the first language. We have to use some other tools. And we tried to use these tools. We tried to gesture. We tried to mimic, to, I don't know, to draw something to show what we mean. But this girl was using Russian all the time, a lot, and that was, well, that was a very difficult situation to maintain, and she didn't know how to use these strategies actually, and that was a problem, and she didn't even know why exactly she would need to use those strategies, because Russian speaking teacher, yay, I can use Russian, ignore all the students in the. Yep. And well, after that, I didn't have that much exposure to this experience, but yes, I taught students with whom I didn't share any L1 here and there. But well, I do have experience teaching lots of beginner students, and the principle that I'm trying to follow is to limit L1 as much as possible from day one. During the first lesson, okay, I will explain how it's going to happen, but then after that, I'm going to limit it as much as possible. Yeah, to try to at least imitate the situation when we don't have this opportunity to use L1 and try to use some other tools.
So even if you share the same language, don't use it. Try to avoid, right?
Well, as much as possible, but if you need that, of course, sometimes you just need to calm the student down a little bit. And yeah, it's better to use L1 for that. But yeah, in terms of some methodologically defined situations, yeah, it's better not to use L1 if you can.
Okay. Okay, good. Oh, what about actually the psychological atmosphere? Marina has just said that like we need to make our students calm down. How to do that if we don't share the language? Like maybe can you share some phrases which can help our students feel better a bit during the lesson? Or I don't know, some gestures. What can it be? Gary?
That is a tricky question there because I've never
Yeah.
actually really thought about that. The thing is, I think that there's a whole number of things that go into that. And back before the whole COVID, issue, what I normally try to do was, as a teacher, if you're confident enough, then you automatically set the students at ease as well. And then giving them enough time and using their own language, their own words to ask questions, for example, as well, also sets them at ease. So I'd say a combination of those at least, being confident, not rushing things, not pushing the students into doing things that they might not be ready for just yet, and making sure that you use language on their level at least and giving them enough time. I believe that will give them at least some kind of calming atmosphere, and also naturally being reassuring and praising them for their jobs well done at least. But Marina, maybe you can add in something else there, yeah?
Well, I also haven't thought about that actually, but
Mhm.
I don't know. There are some things that you're just using intuitively, and you don't think
Yeah.
about that. But well, I would say that staying positive and ignoring all the mistakes, big mistakes, and something like that is going to be the key here, because when a student is making mistakes or doesn't know how to perform simplest tasks. Uh, well, it's important to not, well, what they're afraid of, that their teacher is going to start laughing at them. And they're afraid that their teacher is going to think that, well, the student is stupid or something like that. And if you're not giving any signs that you are this teacher in their head, it's going to help them immensely. It's going to ease off the situation a little bit. So staying positive, well, it's in your posture, it's in your facial expression, it's in your intonation, it's in the gestures that you're using. You're trying to support them, you're smiling, and all of that is going to kind of, well, combine in one good atmosphere in a lesson that is going to help them relax a little bit, just at least, and start laughing at their mistakes, so that they would not be so afraid of making them in front of you.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's important, yeah, just like to have good psychology, good atmosphere during the lesson, yeah. I can help them even with our smile, yeah, with some good words. Why not? It makes sense. So I hope that this information was really useful not only to me but also to our listeners, and we all will find a way to make our lessons better, especially with low-level adult students. So, dear teachers, our time is up, unfortunately. And in the chat, you can find the link. We will be really glad if you fill out this feedback form because your opinions are very important for us. You can help us be better, prepare the topics which you want to know, which you want to like find some information about. Yeah. Thank you for coming, everyone. So I hope you had a good time here. Marina, Gary, thank you so much for this information. Yeah, we were really glad to hear that. So have a good day today and see you next time. Hope it will be really soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. See you around.
Thank you. Bye bye.